All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started for everybody joining us as well as those on Facebook. I want to welcome everybody this afternoon to the latest chat we have in our series of webinars. We're happy to be able to continue bringing this series of informational chats to all of you to keep you up to date with good information and helpful information during these changing, challenging times. I'm Frank Niesenbaum, VP of Sales for E2B Tech and C2B Tech. Both our ERP and cannabis operations, and we'll be your host today. I'm really excited to be joined by Russ Groff, the VP of Channel Management for our partner, Netstock. Russ is, I won't age you, Russ, but been around like me for about 35 years in the ERP business space, software space. He spent the last 6 years with Netstock really focused on helping businesses create a more profitable warehouse. And I know those of you joining or listening excuse me, have have some needs and pains around the warehouse management piece. So Russ will be sharing his experience with us as it relates to today's topic, which is the inventory management optimization before, during, and after the pandemic. Boy, there's a mouthful, and it definitely is something we all have going on in our world today. So again, welcome, Russ.
Thank you very much.
Before we begin, we always like to start with a couple of poll questions. The first one is up on the screen and is asking, have you experienced any disruptions in your supply chain caused by the pandemic? We'll give you a little bit of time to answer. Not sure we have a whole lot there, but we'll see what we get. Okay. All right, there we go. We're going to go ahead. We're going to go to the second question, which is, how does your business manage your inventory? Give me a couple choices there: inventory module and ERP, inventory spreadsheets, barcoding scanning systems, inventory replenishment app, or something else. We'll just go ahead and give you a message to post. So. You look like a lot of shy people today. All right, well, we're going to jump right into it then. I think we've got what we needed there. So Russ, again, welcome. And, I know there's a lot to talk about. I guess the first question I have is just trying to understand, what maybe some of the more traditional disruptions that occur in supply chains, and how does what we're all experiencing with COVID-19 compare? I mean, obviously we've never had this before, but there are a lot of disruptions anyway. I'm just curious as to how you think these compare.
Yeah, that's a good starting point, I think. Anybody that works in supply chain certainly knows that disruptions are common. They're just part of the landscapes, part of the deal. In fact, even right just before the pandemic hit, right, a lot of our firms were dealing with trade wars and tariff issues, and how do I address those? Do I need to look at other suppliers and so forth? And so there were clearly already disruptions going on as the pandemic hit us. But there's also things like severe weather, right? You have tornadoes or hurricanes, those kinds of things, earthquakes. Then there's labor strikes and political unrest that could occur depending on where you're buying product from or where you're selling to, what markets you're in, what products you're in. Terrorist attacks, unfortunately, have sometimes come into play. So those disruptions are common. There's always something happening. Everybody in supply chain knows they're coming. They just don't know when. But then there also are some kind of predefined expected disruptions, things like Chinese New Year and when Europe goes on holiday in August, and sometimes plant maintenance shutdowns that are scheduled and are known in advance, and so planners can work around those things. Disruption is just part and parcel of the game that we're in. But yeah, clearly COVID is way different, right? It's way different in scope, in that it affected the entire globe, even though it may have different waves and geographies that's hitting at different times. Everybody's been impacted by it, which has never occurred before. And now the length of time that this has been lasting, right? Where some places are looking at a second wave, depending on who you talk to, we're still battling the first wave. So the length of time. So yeah, clearly unprecedented, subsiding and surging in different regions. If you're buying from Brazil right now, you're having real trouble. So it's clearly a worst case scenario. But I think one of the things that I've been hearing and talking to people about is it's taught us some lessons. As you know, I used to live in Phoenix, Arizona for years, where it's about 115 there, and has been for the last couple months.
Yeah.
And if you had an air conditioning system that wasn't ready to handle that kind of stress, it was going to break. And so any system under stress is potentially going to break. So our supply chains are under serious stress right now, and we're all learning how well positioned we are, and how we're ready to deal with some of those stresses. And I think we're learning some lessons from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I hear you, talking about it, and it's interesting that while COVID is ridiculous and is causing extra stress on everybody, you've had to deal with this in your work with companies, and we have as well. So, I'm sure that there are a lot of best practices and tips that you've developed, obviously over the years with regard to supply chain. But so maybe you can share a few on how they could be, using those tips and tricks to,
Sure.
to manage disruptions, even unlike this one.
Sure. And we do get the opportunity to present at different conferences and so forth. Sage has us do breakout sessions when summits are being held, or different events around the country. So we do have a chance to talk about that a little bit. And we tend to think about it really in three different categories or areas of concern: people, processes, and technology. And so I think if you can organize your thinking in that way, then you can focus a little bit better on those areas. So, for example, do you have the right people on the team, right? And are they properly trained and supported? Do we have well-defined processes for them to follow, right? Is that well documented? Is it consistent, and so forth? Do we give our people decision-making authority, and do they understand what levels of autonomy they have, so that they can make those decisions on their own without having to send things upstream, maybe for approval and so forth. So there's a lot you can do on that side. Certainly having the right processes in place, because again, as we talk about with disruptions, this is all about risk mitigation, right? We know risk is there. We have risk in our supply. We have risk in our demand. And so it's about how do we minimize that and mitigate that by having certain processes in place, things like maybe having alternate suppliers, for example, if there's that hurricane that occurs, or a plant shutdown or a labor strike or something. Do I have another source that I can go to get product? Do I have options for my shipping techniques, right? Do I want to come out of different ports? Have I got different shippers lined up to help me if I have those issues? Do I have a regular cadence for communications with my suppliers and with my customers up and down the supply chain? So there's processes that come into play. And then the final piece, of course, which is near and dear to our heart at Netstock, is the technology piece, right? Do we have tools that give the buyers and planners, the folks dealing with these issues in the firm, actionable information? Do we give them access to data that you trust and that you can now take action on? So I think all those three things really work together, that if you've got the right people with the right processes and systems, and give them tools and technology to help them make right decisions, then you're going to fare better than your competitor.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I'm glad that you mentioned technology and systems. Obviously, both of us, working in the world of technology and ERP and as warehouse automation, things we can do in the cloud with products like yours or Intact that we work with, or other things. Just technology in general is going to help with the processes. Automation is key. What you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I was a Sage reseller for many years before I got into the ISV side of it. 25 years I was on your side of the desk, and we always talked about what's the appropriate technology, right?
Yeah.
And there might be a time and place where a pen and pad is all the technology you need to solve a business problem, right?
Right.
But what we know in supply chain now is there's so many moving parts, so much complexity, that pen and paper is not going to do it. Walking out to the warehouse and seeing what bin is empty isn't gonna make the problem go away.
Yeah. No, and it was good. And you mentioned something that sticks with me. Obviously, suppliers are key for distribution networks and people working with it at a time like this. So, when you mention alternate suppliers, so what are some of the key things or actions that a buyer can be doing or should be doing when talking about alternate suppliers?
Good question. I think it's probably just really a couple things. First, have them identified and in place, right? That's the first step, is do I have the opportunity to have an alternate supplier for this product or this line of products? right? And then secondly, hopefully those are in a different geography than your primary supplier.
Yep.
Maybe even coming through a different port of entry as a way of mitigating the risk of port issues, right? Um, and then I think it really is an issue of communication. I do a series of what we call supply chain chats, and I've been talking to thought leaders and consultants that have national practices. And boy, if I had $1 for every time I heard the word communication or communicate or pick up the darn phone and just talk to people, I'd be rich, right? So just staying in contact with them. And learning what they're seeing in the marketplace, right? That's another resource of information that you can leverage in terms of what they're hearing in the marketplace from their customers, from their suppliers, and so forth. And then a third piece of advice that I just really learned recently to understand it better actually is use those alternate suppliers once in a while.
Right. Yep.
Right? Even if it's not the best profit margin or the easiest process, that's why you have them as a secondary supplier, not your primary. But use them once in a while for some product or other as a way of just staying in touch with them, staying current with their processes, make sure you got all the right forms and paperwork and the right people contacts and so forth, so that if you do need them in a pinch, you're not unknown to them, right? That you've got a little bit of recent history with them and you can stay up to date with them. So that's really good advice, I think, that I've heard from some others in this time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Relationships are key, and it doesn't hurt to already have it in place.
Yep.
So post disruption, right? Key problems post disruption that are going to occur with forecasting. There's another topic. So forecasting, I can't imagine forecasting during a pandemic. So it's like, how what's going to happen? Where are we going from here?
Yeah. Yeah, and what we've been talking to our customers about is really to kind of think about this over different time horizons. I think we're probably through the first horizon, that initial shock, in the short term, where it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? How long is this going to last? What can I do? What kind of shape are my customers in? Right? If I was in restaurant supply, I knew right away I was in trouble, right? But how long is it going to last? And now I make those changes. So I think there's that short-term impact of just kind of surviving, being as nimble as you can and getting through it and doing all that communicating that we talked about. But now you get into the midterm, kind of probably where we are for a lot of our customers over those few months where the initial shock was over. And okay, now we hear this term new normal, right? What's the new normal look like? What's the impact on those processes and those suppliers that I've been working with? And then watch for what we call the bullwhip effect in that time frame, right? Where you'll see this if you were a toilet paper supplier, right? You couldn't get it on the shelf fast enough, and so everybody ramped up all their production, and now everybody's well stocked and probably don't need that product for a while. So now all of a sudden demand drops off. So there's that bullwhip effect that occurs. So you have to be conscious of that and watch for that. And again, communication really helps a lot. And you have a longer term impact, right? Forecasting tools like ours are going to have historical impacts, supply and demand, and what were sales like a year ago and 6 months ago. If it's seasonal, it's going to look at those patterns.
Right.
And can I really rely on that data now, right? A year from now, when I go back and look at what's happening today, how reliable is that? Now, some of the algorithms will automatically smooth some of those weird spikes and dips and so forth. But you still have to be on top of that, understand what was going on behind the scenes, and manually adjust those forecasts. So we're talking to our customers about really keeping an eye on that and forecasting more frequently.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, you mentioned seasonality and things like that. And some of those are always there, right? So software and systems like yours take things into account. We can look at historic and what's there. But I don't think anybody knows what tomorrow is going to look like, 6 months or a year from now. I love, your example of the retail or restaurants or things like that. A lot of them have closed and now some are opening, and it's all changed. Your advice is helpful. I think you need to really be on top of it, and the systems will help. That's a big part of it. So now you look at where you are. What can businesses do to identify where the excess is building up? Are there quick ways to assess how much excess a given business has? How are they looking at their stock level?
Yeah, that's really critical, of course, and it's not easy, right? I think the question is, how easy is it? And the
in
answer
normal
is it's
time,
not. Right. It's a challenge no matter what, and I think the first thing that folks need to recognize is that when we talk about excess stock, that's not what we're calling safety stock or buffer stock, right? Safety stock or a buffer stock is there to mitigate risk, to manage fluctuations in supply and demand under normal times. And it's policy driven, right? It's calculated, it's purposeful, right? I say, okay, this is actually what I need. Above and beyond that then becomes what we would call excess. And so the first step in that is just really understanding what that proper safety stock needs to be. And that has to take into account supplier performance, right? Do I typically get stuff on time or late, or do I get short shipped or over shipped? Both of which can be problems, right? If I get over shipped, I'm going to have excess. And so how well does that supplier perform? How well is my forecast performing is a factor in that supply safety stock calculation. So there's a lot of effort that just goes into that component of it. And then anything above that we can define as excess. And then one of the other things that we really focus on is classifying items. So if something's a slow mover, that's a bigger problem for me in terms of excess, because normal attrition is going to take longer for that to reduce, right, and get back into a normal state. If it's a fast mover, maybe I can just live with it and do what I can with that.
Yeah, that's going to be the challenge, and so I like it because we talk about excess and stock outs. Have always been there, and today they are real problems, right? So today we've got, again, a whole new world. So excess products, stock outs, today's problems. So again, I know you're not a fortune teller. I'm going to maybe pull out your crystal ball and kind of look at it, but we're all doing that every day. How are we how do we identify and address the tomorrow problems, right? That we're anticipating the new world.
Sure. Well, and again, communication, I keep harping on that, right? If I'm in touch with and not only my suppliers, but my suppliers, right? One step up the chain, and not just my customers, but maybe my customers' customers. I can get a little bit of an advance notice on things that are trending or going on in the marketplace and so forth. So that will always continue to play a part. But I think this is a role that technology can play nicely for us is anticipating those things because of my ability to do some sophisticated math and project out into the future, right? So, for example, I might have product on the shelf today, so it's not showing up as a stock out problem today. But if I can project demand for that and know what POs I've got, what my replenishment cycle look like, I can predict if I expect to run out before the next shipment arrives. And now I can get ahead of the curve on that and see, do I have a PO created, first of all? And if I do, when's it due? What's that time gap? And can I now maybe partially ship some of that, right? I want to air freight the whole thing, but if I can air freight 10% or 20% to bridge that potential gap that I'm seeing that my technology is warning me of, then I can take action again, right? Again, actionable data. Same thing with surplus orders, as we call them in Netstock. If I've got a PO on the way that I don't need yet because I've had a reduction in demand, then maybe if I can see that ahead of time, I put the stop on that. Hey, hold on to that for 2 weeks, or kill that order altogether and add it to my next one that's maybe already in the standard replenishment cycle. So I can take action against those future events if I have visibility to them. And that's really where the technology has a big advantage for me.
Yeah, that's logical. I mean, I think, the communication you mentioned is key, and then the systems and being diligent. We've got to be on top of our customers, our vendors, and I really like the reference to the vendor's vendor, right? The step above. I don't think the average person looks at, if maybe they're buying from a manufacturer or somebody else, where are they getting their supply, and are they going to have problems? And
right.
I know you can't track that, but that communication and having the systems to forecast are going to help you be ahead of that curve. And I think that's key.
And one of the things that we do, Frank, in our tool, for example, is if we can project that future requirement from a supplier, I can actually send that supplier a report, right, that says, hey, for the next 12 months, or a spreadsheet, or however I want to communicate that, here's what I'm expecting to buy from you and when. So now your supplier gets ahead of the curve and can plan their production or their buying accordingly, right? So again, it's still part of the communication, but it's information as part of that communication that can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And while the pad and paper might help recording some stuff, I don't think it's going to help with
Yeah.
that, right? So that,
No.
and again, that's where, I think as we've talked about it, systems were important to us all along. We've been in this business a long time, but I think they're even more important now, and more modern and more up to date and more capable. So when you look at that,
Yeah.
I know you're very familiar with a couple of the products that we work with. Obviously, yours, Netstock users, and Sage Inventory Advisor.
Right.
What are you seeing with those things during the COVID-19 disruption? Any trends you feel, or what do you see going on with those solutions?
Yeah, I'm not as close to the customer side of the fence in Netstock as some of our other colleagues, but obviously I'm in communication with them, and we talk a lot internally. We've been trying to communicate very proactively with our existing install base. We've got over 800 customers in North America, over 1,500 globally now using our application. So we have the chance to get a lot of that feedback and look at trends at kind of a macro level. And in fact, we're doing some kind of big data sort of machine learning type of work with all that data that we acquire now. We've got billions of dollars worth of inventory being managed by our app. So it really gives us a window into that. So we certainly have those discussions internally. But I think the big thing that we've been communicating proactively with our customers is to really understand, make sure they're getting every ounce of power out of the tool, right? Because we all know, as we've implemented ERP and accounting systems over the years, it's frustrated us that a lot of our customers are lucky if they're getting 15, 30, 50% of the power out of the tool that they spent good money for, right? So make sure that they're using everything, that they're aware of all the different tools and parameters that can be tweaked and so forth in the Netstock application. And then using that to do bulk adjustments of forecasts, and to do them more frequently, to really be looking at it more closely on a more frequent basis. I think we're seeing a lot of firms that are shortening their replenishment cycle. So in other words, maybe I would typically buy this product every 3 months or every 6 months. Since the future is so uncertain, let's shorten that cycle a little bit, buy a little less more often. And it may not be as profitable, because I might pay a little bit more if I'm buying smaller quantities, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it makes me more nimble and ability to adjust to those rapidly changing scenarios out there, right? All the ups and downs and the surges and all that's going on. So shortening the replenishment cycle is one thing that we're seeing as a trend, and really focusing and understanding the nature of the items in the inventory by classifying them, right? Which ones are really profitable for me? Which ones are really slow movers or fast movers?
Yep.
And focusing my attention where, if I've got limited time and I'm scrambling, right, which most of us are, and especially now many firms have had furloughs, right,
Yep.
as business dropped. Now I've got new people maybe managing the tool, or less people managing the tool. So I just don't have all the time in the day to try to figure out everything. So use the 80-20 rule, right? You let the technology help me identify which are the most important items to be focused on, and then work on those and solve those problems, and I'll be ahead of the game as a result. So I think those are some of the recommendations and things that we're talking to our clients about.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and I like the fact you talked about, kind of artificial intelligence in a vague way. I mean, that's where the future's going, right? So predictability versus reacting to things. These systems have come for what you and I are used to when we were just tracking inventory, into forecasting and being on top of what we're doing, and what you've just described in the last half hour, and now even in the future with AI and things like that, where we're going to be able to predict. And again, not a pandemic, we know that. So,
Right.
but other things. So it's been great. I mean, you've been really helpful. I think a lot of great information. Before we wrap it up, any final thoughts on what's going on with inventory optimization or warehousing, just in general, the Russ Groff?
Well, I think one thing that has struck me, and I've had this feedback from practitioners, people that are in the planning business, that doing it every day. I think one of the impacts of COVID that we're going to see impact, especially small, medium-sized firms, which is where you and I tend to target our focus, right? Not the big Fortune 500 guys. Right. They've always had this, but I think what's going to impact the middle market now is that the planning process is now going to have a bigger seat at the table, if you will, in the process and the planning, strategic planning of a business, right? The C-suite now has to consider more than ever the impact of supply chain on their profitability, right? What is our vision and mission as a company? What's our message to the marketplace? And what are the policies that drive that? And one of those key policies has to be really understanding how important supply chain management is. And I think that's going to be a long-term impact of this, is that you're going to see many more schools offer supply chain degrees. There are going to be a lot of people graduating with them. That's already been a trend. And firms, even in the small, medium-sized business, are going to say, this is really a critical function within our organization. We got to get the right people on the board and then give them the right tools to do this job.
Oh, yeah, that's a great view. I concur 100%. I think you're right on the money with what you just said. Makes a lot of sense. Well, Russ, I appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. It's been great. Boy, it seems like a half hour we do this goes really fast. The next thing I know, I'm looking at the clock and it's crazy. But I thank you. I'm sure that, if any of our audience has questions or wants to reach out or needs some help, we're all available. We can put you in contact with Russ and his team or ourselves to help you. We hope this information has been helpful and was recorded, so we'll be able to get it out there. And we have another webinar coming up in actually, it's not July 19th. It's I think it's in August. I think that date is wrong.
That would be wrong.
But August 19th, I believe. But will be another topic that I think will be good for people to join. So join us then. And for now, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
everybody.
Thanks, Frank.
Take care. Take care, Russ.
Yep, you too.
Bye. Bye.